Welcome back to The Real Story. A new era of diplomacy is here. Gone are the days of creating enemies and pushing war all over the world, as was the case under the Biden administration, because the Trump administration is taking concrete steps to achieve peace and improve our relations with world leaders across the board. It is a major paradigm shift in Washington, and it already seems to be working, at least in the case of the war between Russia and Ukraine, because top officials from the US and Russia are currently negotiating an end to the war in Saudi Arabia. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio attended the peace talks on Trump's behalf, and things reportedly went well. Further details haven't been shared quite yet, and no representatives for Ukraine were present. However, this meeting is quite significant because it's the very first time officials from the US and Russia have met in person since the war began. President Trump was also asked about the first round of negotiations at a press conference yesterday. And here's what he said.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the Russia talks, your impression of how they went today, and if you're perhaps more confident or less confident of a deal after what happened today?
Well, much more confident. They were very good. Russia wants to do something. They want to stop the savage barbarianism. I mean, what's going on over there? It's soldiers are being killed by the thousands on a weekly basis. It's ridiculous. And they're not American soldiers. They're Russian soldiers, and they're Ukrainian soldiers largely, although a lot of Koreans have been killed, as you know. Quite a bit of them have been killed. They came over to fight, and a large portion have been wiped out. But we want to end it. It's a senseless war. It should have never happened, would have never happened if I was president, and it's a shame to see it.
Interesting. But despite this initial step, any peace deal would need to be signed by both Russia and also Ukraine. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he won't approve any deal that is negotiated without his direct involvement. Zelensky also could have been at that meeting, but he postponed his trip to Saudi Arabia, which was originally planned for today. Zelensky said he did it to avoid any coincidences. And while this could be true, two unnamed sources told Reuters it's because he didn't want to give the meeting any legitimacy. In either case, this meeting comes after Trump spoke to both Putin and Zelensky on the phone last week in separate calls. And Trump has said he might even meet with Putin before the month's end, presumably to discuss a peace deal in further detail. And in terms of a deal, there are talks about hypothetically sending peacekeeping troops to the region. And on Sunday, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced he is willing to do so. He also said his government is committed to spending £3 billion on Ukraine security through the year 2030, and that includes possibly sending peacekeeping forces. Now, Trump was also asked about stationing European peacekeepers in the region at yesterday's press conference as well. Take a look.
Do you support stationing European peacekeeping troops in Ukraine as part of this peace deal?
If they want to do that, that's great. I'm all for it. If they want to do that, I think that'd be fine.
Even if the Russians are...
I mean, I know France has mentioned it. Others have mentioned it. UK has mentioned it. But if we have a peace deal, I think having troops over there from the standpoint of Europe, we won't have to put any over there because, we're very far away. But having troops over there would be fine. I would not object to it at all. We're talking about this now, peace. We have either a ceasefire or a peace itself, and we're looking to do both.
Joining us now to discuss is military defense attorney Davis Younts. Davis, thank you for joining me.
Always an honor.
So I want to ask you about this idea of stationing peacekeeping troops on the ground. Obviously, that would be a part of making sure the peace deal, if it gets passed, is upheld. So what do you think about that idea?
I think if there is a negotiated peace, it does make sense, and it could be helpful to ensuring long-term peace in the region, but it shouldn't be NATO forces, and it certainly should not be U.S. forces. And I think that's the point of everything we've heard from President Trump as well as the administration. This is not, the U.S. is not going to go in and patrol the border between Ukraine and Russia. That's not going to be our role in any negotiated peace. So I think there's reasonable things that can be done, but I do think it has to start with a peace agreement.
Okay. Now, having officials from the U.S. and Russia meeting face to face, it seems pretty significant, but the question remains, is this a significant step toward ending the war? What do you think?
It absolutely is. And we have to understand that the Russian conflict with Ukraine has essentially been a proxy war funded by the United States. The amount of money we have poured into Ukraine has what's prolonged this war in many respects. So while we haven't declared war against Russia, we have been supporting the enemy that they're fighting and imposing tariffs on them. And we also cut off all communication. We essentially cut diplomatic ties with Russia during the Biden administration. So I cannot emphasize enough how significant of a change this is and what a significant step it is towards peace negotiations, because we have now reestablished diplomatic ties with Russia. We are in communication with them, and we have essentially ended our unfettered support of Ukraine. So we're essentially saying we are not going to continue to invest in a proxy war, an undeclared proxy war against Russia with Ukraine. And that's the starting point. So this is a huge and significant change that is going to, I hope, continue to lead to a peaceful resolution of this conflict.
Okay. Well, speaking of, let's talk for a second about terms of the deal, because we're still not getting too many specifics about what's been discussed specifically, but I just want to ask for your take about this. What do you think is a realistic situation when it comes to getting a peace deal?
Well, what I can tell you is the only thing Zelensky has said is he wants nuclear weapons and Ukraine to be a part of NATO. Neither one of those, that's just a negotiating position. That's just a starting point. I've said this before, but I do think something is going to have to happen with Crimea. Crimea provides a critical seaport to Russia, a warm water port that's been a strategic objective for them for a long time. And Russia would argue that should be Russian territory, regardless of Ukraine's and their desire to have those borders. So I do think there's going to be a discussion about what territory is going to be shared. Maybe perhaps the Crimea will be something that Russia can use and have access to, and that's where the peacekeepers are. But I do see there's going to be a discussion of territory. The other interesting question is, when is Ukraine going to hold a free election? Because one of the concerns the United States has started to express is the fact that, President Zelensky's approval rating is supposedly very low among his own people, and they have suspended all democratic processes and elections. They've been under martial law there. So there is a question, is Zelensky even a legitimate democratic leader of Ukraine right now? So there are a lot of things to come out, but I do look to a discussion of what territory Russia will maintain. They've held the Crimea since 2014. I do think that's going to be a significant part of any negotiated settlement.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, he's come out as well to address the issue of Ukraine and NATO. It seems like a very bad idea, and I think that would just fuel the fire, so to speak, because that is a red line in the sand for Putin. So I'm not here to defend Putin whatsoever. I just want us to be realistic in managing our expectations about what we could possibly do. But on this note of Pete Hegseth, I do want to switch gears for a second, because I saw a really interesting story. It turns out he is conducting, or looking to conduct, an investigation into the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. He says that he's already got some investigators in mind. I want to get your take about that.
This is something that is very, very critically important to me personally. I mean, frankly, I almost get emotional about it when this comes up, because I joined the military myself after law school. 9/11 happened when I was in law school, and I volunteered to serve at that point. So my entire 20 years of military service was spent in the global war on terror, support of Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. I was never in Afghanistan, but I deployed to other locations to support that effort. And the issue is, this felt felt like we lost the war. So we spent 2 decades fighting something and sacrificing so much, having people be injured and killed, and then to see us withdraw the way we did without explanation. And I've said as well, there was clear leadership failures as we withdrew. One of the things you saw was that some commanders on the ground in Afghanistan actually destroyed their equipment. They destroyed classified materials. They destroyed weapons caches. Others did not. What that meant is there was not clear leadership from the Biden administration at the top. There was not clear leadership. And one of the things we know is General Milley didn't want to bring the equipment back. President Trump said, we're not pulling out without bringing the equipment back. Milley didn't want to. It looks like Milley got his way, and that put, just unaccountable millions and billions of dollars of equipment in the hands of our enemies, and it will be used against us and our allies other places. So everything about this, from leadership failures, policy failures, General Milley's role in this, needs to be thoroughly investigated, and that will go a long way in restoring trust and accountability among veterans and people who might want to serve in the future.
Absolutely. Now, what I'm hoping for with that investigation is to just get to the truth and then talk about how we can prevent something like that from ever happening again. And ultimately, that just speaks to this administration's goal and commitment of getting to a more peaceful world. Peace through strength. Really, really simple idea, but really profound at the same time. So I'm really hopeful for that to happen. But just quick, last 30 seconds for you, Davis. Do you believe that in the next 4 years we can really get closer to building a more peaceful world atmosphere?
I think we can, but what we know we can do is we can establish a national defense strategy that protects our homeland, protects our borders, and enables America to be a leader for peace on the world stage. So that we can achieve.
Okay. Music to my ears, truly, Davis. And as always, thank you for stopping by.
Thank you. God bless.
It's left to men like Davis Younts to fight for these Navy SEALs.
R. Davis Younts, you are an attorney who has successfully defended naval officer.
Davis Younts has been instrumental in defending service members.
Davis Younts successfully defended an evangelical Navy lieutenant.